Kids in School in Mount Vernon, Ohio, about 1811. Kids in School in 2006 in Mount Vernon, Ohio. You might think that the more things change, the more they stay the same. Okay, the furniture, the clothes, the tools have changed, but the reasons the children are there must be the same, and the way the school is operated must be the same, right? Wrong. A short visit with the records, the historians, and the memories of our neighbors will show us what a long way we've come, bringing the frontier into the future. Like other towns, Mount Vernon's growth over 200 years has a lot to do with what's happened in these buildings and within the youngsters who've passed through them. Find out what's changed and what's the same, especially discover how the changes and choices we've made and continue to make in education may shape our future. Education in 1805 didn't look like anything at all. When settlers first came to the frontier, their priority was survival, knowing where their next meal was coming from. Education had to wait. In 1811, the very first school in Mount Vernon was built, just a 14 by 18 foot, one-story log cabin here in the center of town. How important was education in the life of the new town? The Congress of the new nation, the United States of America, thought it was very important. The Northwest Ordinance in 1787 reiterated the importance of education, specifying,
"Religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged."
In 1811, the future of many settlers didn't seem to demand much in the way of formal education. Mount Vernon benefited from an extraordinary number of well-educated citizens in those early days. People like Hosmer and Henry Curtis, Jesse Burgess Thomas, Columbus Delano, people who established the basis of a library, who founded an historical society, and county fairs to educate and improve agricultural practice. Generally, parents' expectations for their children were simple. They wanted them to learn reading, writing, arithmetic, and spelling. Geography and grammar would come later, if there were time. After the passage of the Ohio School Law in 1853, the next few decades saw universal free public education accepted for providing the basics, the 3 R's of reading, writing, and arithmetic. High school was still considered a luxury for which few people had the time. As late as 1874, the school board president Joseph Davis instructed Mount Vernon teachers.
Teachers in all grades are expected to give their pupils careful and systematic instruction in composition and letter writing, and in the principles of science which they are able to comprehend, always bearing in mind that many pupils will reach no higher grade than the one in which they now are, and that the teacher's work is not so much to fit pupils for a higher grade of school as to prepare them to engage successfully in the business of life. Above all, teachers should aim to fortify the minds of their pupils with sound moral principles.
Contrast that statement with today's emphasis on academic achievement, especially proficiency exams. These are tests given throughout a student's school experience, which the state of Ohio uses to rate the competence of both students and school systems. Taxpayers in 2005 like the idea of accountability, the assurance that the schools are meeting educational goals. The question, though, is which goals?
Well, you know what it does is it makes us work more as a team to go to bring the standards of their education up. You know, yes, sometimes that stifles creativity, but on the other hand, a lot of things were left out based on teachers just deciding what they were going to teach. There was their area of expertise that they really loved, and then there was part of what they were teaching that they didn't love so much, and a lot of times that was left off. And I think that's why, you know, we have achievement tests today, is because there's too often teachers were put in positions that they weren't highly qualified to teach, just to fill a need. And I think those kind of things are not going on as much now as they used to.
So how do we deal with the current society, prepare them? Are we still preparing students for a society that was in the early 1900s? Are we preparing them for the life that they're going to be in? So that's where test scores need to be very careful in preparing that student for the future.
Education has often been the means for people from other countries to join the mainstream in this country, and education has been the ticket to better jobs that offer an easier life. John and Rita Zuccaro's father, who arrived in Mount Vernon as a 16-year-old, originally from Sicily, taught them to value education for what it would do for their lives.
Yeah, he said, "I'm not sending you to school and college to be in this kind of business.
Because he
this
worked.
business didn't take an education. He, as I said earlier, he really didn't have much education.
He didn't have
and
education.
He
See?
felt like he did this because it's what he had to do because he really didn't know anything else.
See, I believe he was like what when he said he started working on the street with his dad, like 7 years old.
Yes.
Yeah, he would push a little wagon for 1.5 cents a day to help out. And this is all he and his 5 brothers ever did. They were all in the wholesale fruit and produce business. They didn't have schooling. They all came from Italy, and they worked very hard all their lives. And he did not want Johnny to work that hard. He wanted us to be educated. He wanted us to go to college, and we did. And he wanted my brother to excel, which he has, and he was very proud of that. He believed in education very strongly, in school and education, didn't he?
Yes,
Yeah.
very much so.
Schools were the means for assimilating other cultural groups into Mount Vernon, such as the Belgians, the Greeks, the African Americans.
I think growing up with my mother, who was so filled with love, who was adamant about her children becoming educated and doing well in school, who would sit every night at the dining room table with us while we did our homework, every night. That was the priority in our household. You will get your education.
People's expectations for education in Mount Vernon have always been diverse. Reasons for attending and developing alternative schools have varied. Parents could send children away to academies. Parochial schools wouldn't be an option for another half-century. And since there were no compulsory school attendance laws, another choice was no school at all. Some parents wanted higher educational standards for their students than the early common schools, the subscription schools, could often provide. In Mount Vernon, Reverend R.R. Sloan and his wife established a select school and academy for high school students, both boys and girls, in 1844. An early location of Reverend Sloan's academy was here, the site of the second Mount Vernon School. Then it was also a brick building on the corner of High Street and Mulberry. This building was in deplorable condition by the time the town of Mount Vernon unleashed it onto Reverend Sloan and Associates in 1847. It was leased to them with the conditions of completing adequate repairs. They made the repairs and offered classes here until their lease was purchased in 1851 by Fifth Ward citizens for their school. Because of the cost of private academies and subscription schools, you might think that parents would be glad of the law in 1849 that established school funding to provide a free education for all children. Not so. Albert Williams, writing in 1911, speaks of the reasons for continuing to choose a private education rather than the new public schools.
In fact, many kept their children at home. Many of the more wealthy and aristocratic ones felt that they dare not allow their children to mingle with the rougher, poorer classes. Hence, they went back to the old select school plan. It really took many years to overcome this prejudice. In the meantime, the private school and academy were immensely popular.
Universal public education was considered very progressive in 1850. Another alternative to public schools, which began in Mount Vernon in the 1800s and still thrives today, is the parochial school. The earliest, 1856, was St. Vincent de Paul's School, which began as a Roman Catholic elementary school in a home on MacArthur Street, near the school's present location. St. Vincent's congregation completed their first elementary building in 1872, adding high school classes in the 1880s. High school classes ended in 1968, but the elementary school continues to attract many students, and not all Roman Catholic, from families preferring an alternative to public school education.
And since the St. Vincent School is a Roman Catholic school, it is the goal of the school to prepare children to live a productive life in God's company. Now that means that a certain amount of our religious education is in instruction in the Catholic faith. But a lot of it is comparative religion, especially when we get into the upper grades. Every classroom starts and ends its day with a prayer. That makes us different from a public school.
We both went to St. Vincent.
St. Vincent de Paul. There was a big convent where the grade school is now, and that must have had 10 or 12 nuns in it. You had all these nuns in every room teaching you and teaching you. They devoted their life to that, and they're wonderful teachers, weren't they?
It was a true Catholic school.
I mean, they devoted their life to teaching you for 12 years of school. Yeah, if you weren't looking, they'd walk up behind you and smack you on the back with their book or something to get your
Just
attention.
attention
Like
getters,
if you were
that's all.
dozing off or something, which the boys like to do a lot.
No one that I knew, though.
You know,
But I know that the schools had to close eventually, or they had to close the high school just because from financial needs. And I don't believe there's any nuns at all, I think.
we have
over there.
one. We only have one nun in the city of Mount Vernon right now.
Another long-standing parochial tradition in Mount Vernon is the Mount Vernon Academy. Opened by the Seventh-day Adventists first as a healthcare facility, it was converted to a school in 1894. This school was to provide a place where the youth of both sexes may receive a Christian education under influences favorable to the development of a Christian character. Mount Vernon Academy graduated 10 high school students in 1898. For about 15 years, the Academy offered college courses too, as Mount Vernon College. The college moved to Washington, D.C., and Mount Vernon Academy developed its program for elementary through high school. Surviving a major fire in 1926, which fortunately occurred while students were away for Christmas, the Academy grew into an entire campus, now enrolling students from across the United States and several foreign countries. A newcomer to Mount Vernon parochial education is Christian Star Academy.
It's a Christian school, a private school, small by design, a little different than the traditional public school setting. Yes, this school actually will be ready to celebrate its 25th anniversary this coming school year. And they started, the two founders were Sue Fiesel and Kathy Bender. They moved to this facility, the old former Hannah Browning home here on corner of Sugar and Gay Street. It's very much like a homeschool atmosphere in a more group setting. So it's a very unique setting for education. It's a non-graded, what they call non-denominational Christian school. So there are people of many different faiths that come here and look for a little less traditional type of education. We often refer to the family here at Christian Star Academy, and that's truly what it is in all facets.
Homeschooling was a major part of Mount Vernon's early education, but public schools became so predominant starting in the 1850s that homeschooling by the late 1900s seemed like a new idea.
I know that Knox County has one of the strongest homeschool settings in the state. My last recollection is that there were more than 600 students in one group called the Christian Homeschoolers Association. And I would project, although I don't have the actual statistics, that there would have to be close to 1,000 students in Mount Vernon, or excuse me, in Knox County, who are homeschooled. And I don't think that it speaks that our public schools are bad. It's just a choice and a decision and a very fundamental belief that parents have the opportunity and an obligation to provide the first education. And for those who can deal with the very strenuous situation of homeschooling and take that very seriously, it's a great opportunity.
Significant numbers of people want and expect for their children a wide variety of educational goals, which has led to the rise of the alternative schools we've described in Mount Vernon in 2005. All parents would undoubtedly agree with Jeff Maley's take on what people want from their schools.
But parents want a few things for their children when they come to school. They will tell you, I want my child to be safe, I want my child to be secure, I want my child to have the opportunity to advance in their talent area.
Why are schools so important to us? You know, it's really not that hard to figure out. Who's the most important people in our life? Our children, our grandchildren, our families, because we do handle the world's most precious cargo, and that is our children. And our future and their future comes down to these very few 12 formative years of preparation. Either opens doors for them in the future, not only for them individually and as a family, but as a nation and as a culture.
One of the functions of any school anywhere is to pass on values to students in school, to help them understand the cultural life that goes on in their city. And I think that's one of the things that's happened. I've had other people who have come from larger cities or big suburban areas who say that they wanted to come here because they knew that the schools and the community itself would pass on the small town values, the team loyalty, the patriotism that is very strong in small Midwestern America.
Curriculum and educational standards didn't exist in 1805, 1811, or for many years after. The only curriculum was the bare bones 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic. If a little geography or grammar slipped in, that was just a bonus. Books were another issue in the early 1800s. There were no textbooks. Parents simply sent their students to school with whatever reading material was at home. The only requirement was that the book be missing no pages, and teachers were expected to teach from the unique conglomeration of books that appeared at school. Just before the Civil War, Mount Vernon structured the school into grades. After the Civil War, they developed new courses of study. The textbook situation improved from those early days of using any book at hand. By mid-century, the school board was empowered to decide what subjects would be studied and what textbooks used. Parents paid for those books until 1893, when a law was passed stating that school boards had the option to provide those textbooks to students on free loan. By 1880, the high school curriculum had grown to an impressive range of 34 subjects. With only 3 classrooms and an average enrollment of 85 students, not every topic would have been covered every day. Regardless, cramming an average of 11 subjects and 28 students into each room daily could not have been easy. A close examination of this list reveals a classical bent to the curriculum. Perhaps it's not so odd that the school board president told teachers that their students may not attain any grade higher than the one they were teaching. Many people might find these topics edifying and enriching, but not very relevant to daily life. It was left to the 1900s to expand the curriculum to include subjects like woodworking, metal shop, home economics, and physical education. Particularly at the time immediately following World War II. It was a period of educational innovation and expansion as the post-war baby boomers started to school. As the schools became increasingly responsive to the educational needs of students and the community, plans were approved for a Knox County joint vocational school. The school was completed in 1969 in Mount Vernon and served students from 5 other communities as well. The school's name has changed to the Knox County Career Center.
For the last 15 years, it's been the Knox County Career Center, and part of the reason it's career tech, not just vocational, and so along with the curriculum change came the name change. It's not strictly for high school. In fact, at the rear of this building, we have a new facility which was constructed 2 years ago, and it houses the nursing, massage therapy, a lot of medical programs. We have a large technology center that a lot of the Educational Service Center office personnel use. It's also available to all of the other schools in the community. Plus, we have a significant number of programs that are housed here at night. So if you're here at 9 o'clock at night, sometimes you have a problem finding a parking place. So it's not just a day school orientation. So we implement programs based on need and whatever it might be.
We had arts and crafts, established a really active arts and crafts program at the YMCA, where at one time we had over 1,000 people enrolled. And that was in the 50s. And I consider this all adult education. In Mount Vernon, when I came here, there was it was a Mount Vernon Business College. And all the girls got out of high school. They went to this school and learned to type and to be secretaries, you know. So that lasted then into the 60s, I think. The next thing that I was involved in adult education was when they established the Joint Vocational School. Director of the adult program within the Joint Vocational School asked me to teach an art class, so I taught painting, oil painting for a while. Then he asked me if I would be interested in going into the adult basic education program. It was a very small program. And then it began to grow, and I then took charge of the ABE program, and ended up, when I finally retired in '86, I think we had a staff of 6 or 7 people. We had a program, a special teacher to teach the people who came here from various countries and couldn't speak English. It was our English as a Second Language program.
And it plays a significant role in preparing students for a wide range of careers, from agriculture to office technologies, automotive careers to machine trades, nursing, food service, and tourism.
Well, our students are from all of the home schools within our district, which would include Clear Fork out of Richland County, of course Mount Vernon City, Danville, East Knox, and Centerburg, and Fredericktown. So, and we also open our doors to a lot of other school districts. We have students who come in sometime from Utica or some who come into Highland. Although they have access to other career centers, there are occasions where they just want to be here because of a specific program.
Students receive excellent preparation to step into good jobs or further education when they graduate. Local employers benefit from a steady supply of well-qualified workers. Jeff Maley talks about the shift in school curriculum in general over the decades leading to 2005.
We're a skill-based economy now, but because we've become skill-based, the simple act of hard work isn't enough. There's this anxiety that without those skills, without those advanced computer skills, technology skills, the ability to learn throughout your lifetime, because we know you're going to change jobs 4, 5, 6 times during your lifetime, more advanced education is needed now.
Teaching in those early days of 1811 was respected, but not nearly the profession it was to become 200 years later. The earliest teacher on record in Mount Vernon was Thomas Irvine, who arrived in 1811 from Ireland and who taught for a number of years. Teacher education and certification was decades in the future, especially out here on the frontier where many pioneers couldn't read or write. While some teachers were well educated for that day, one teacher in the community near Mount Vernon listed as his qualifications that he could read, write, and cipher some. On the frontier, where educated teachers were not available, if you could stay one step ahead of your students, you were a qualified teacher. Many teachers were men, but some were women, but generally only until they were married. By 1845, teachers were more consistently qualified, but they continued to be underpaid, while still responsible for providing such classroom amenities as space, furniture, and wood or coal for heat.
It appears incredible that competent teachers could be procured at $22 per month. The meager sum left after paying rent for a suitable schoolroom and providing furniture and fuel was a very small compensation to the teacher for his services, showing that the labors of the teacher in the common free schools at that time were not esteemed very valuable, and certainly they were not very lucrative.
Teacher education in Mount Vernon was promoted through 3-day regional institutes for teachers held in Mount Vernon. At these regional institutes, boards of examiners gave certification tests along the lines of these exams from Meigs County. In 1859, William Mitchell became the first superintendent of schools and supervised a staff of 13 teachers.
The wide range of subjects taught at Mount Vernon's high school by 1859 must have made it a real challenge to find teachers.
In the first part of the 20th century, teacher certification requirements were not as stringent as they would become in the back half of the century.
They didn't have to have too much. My first grade teacher had had 6 months training in a college somewhere, and she was, well, just like a doctor, she was serving her time teaching then, and eventually she would get her teaching certificate. And Thelma Williams, she was just out of college, was probably maybe 18 years old, maybe 19. And she ended up being my 2 daughters' teacher, and she and her husband owned the Williams Flower Shop here in Mount Vernon.
Teaching the Bible in the public schools was also not uncommon.
Teacher education and certification standards in the 20th century grew to include mandatory continuing education. By 2005, school calendars regularly scheduled days for teachers to attend workshops and seminars. With changes in the curriculum came changes in the student-teacher relationship. While teachers in 2005 still hold authority over students, students now may be heard when it comes to settling classroom disputes. Only 125 years ago, School Board President Joseph Davis addressed parents.
Parents and guardians are earnestly requested, in all cases where difficulties or grievances, real or imaginary, may arise, to defer their judgment until the superintendent can be seen and the case fully understood. And never, as they value the happiness of those under their charge, permit them to believe that they have been neglected or unfairly dealt with. In all cases, the presumption should be that the pupil, not the teacher, is at fault.
Teachers of 2005 have available to them a wealth of instructional technology which wasn't even dreamed of in 1805. Jeff Maley explains.
And so what we know about learning is people learn differently. There's been a lot of research in the last 20 years about learning and how people learn. And what's interesting is people believe everyone learns the way they do.
I'm learning as well, and I'm able to find those resources online and put together a PowerPoint presentation when I'm trying to teach a lesson.
You know, so you hear comments that if that child just worked harder, they'd be okay. That's not how that child's doing it.
You're teaching a concept and you want to reinforce that concept with different ways of teaching.
And so what you have to be able to do is deliver the curriculum in a lot of different modalities.
It holds the attention of the kids a little bit better because they are into technology.
And the technology allows you to do that. So you can pop up, for instance, something off the internet. You can bring up a piece of software on the smart board, or we also have these handheld devices where the kids can respond to certain parts of the lesson. So they can immediately respond to it, and then that brings up a graph on the screen. So we know who's getting the right answer and how the class is getting the concept.
I think it's a wonderful opportunity for kids to be able to see outside of their community, where you can go online and you can access different websites for children to be able to see how the other parts of the world are.
If I see that they're not getting it, then we can redo the lesson or do it in a different way to get these kids to understand what we're teaching at that point.
The curriculum teachers in the Mount Vernon schools of 2005 are a far cry from the early 1800s on the frontier. Education, in all its diversity in Mount Vernon, has moved the city well from the frontier into the present.
We are kindred spirits, come from different ancestries. We share a common...
School funding has been a problem for Mount Vernon from the beginning, as it has been everywhere in the United States. There were no tax-supported schools in 1811 when Mount Vernon built its first school here on the public square. 200 years ago, the common school was a subscription school, a school where parents paid the teacher, often partly or entirely, with room and board. The teacher would be passed around from family to family while the school was in session, and usually the families thought it was an advantage for their children to have the teacher stay with them. In 1849, perhaps in response to the terrible conditions of the town's second school here, Mount Vernon voters enthusiastically passed a school plan where the directors in the wards would function much as a school board. Henry Curtis, who had gotten the walls plastered here in school number 2 more than 20 years earlier, was appointed to oversee the schools. Voters found to their surprise that the legislation they had passed gave the new ward directors the power to levy school taxes. Within the year, they repealed the ordinance before any expensive schools could be built. This action saved their wallets and returned Mount Vernon's education to the oversight of the mayor and councilmen, briefly.
Ohio's education law of 1853 established Mount Vernon's first real school board and removed management of the schools from the mayor and city council.
The new school board promptly assessed the existing schools and began planning for new buildings, which have been built regularly ever since, as the need has arisen. After decades of subscription schools, homeschooling, and private schools, the idea of public, tax-supported schools raised a basic question which continues to be asked every time a school levy appears on the ballot. Why should I pay for somebody else's kid's education? In 1853, that question was directed towards tax-supported high schools. Now, many voters, all male in those days, could concede the need for every citizen to be able to do some basic reading, writing, and arithmetic. But high school seemed like a luxury. Convincing the electorate to provide for public education through high school was a hard sell in the 1850s. In 2005, paying for public education is still a challenge. Mount Vernon School Superintendent Jeff Maley tells us,
someone determined, Board of Education, community member, that those services were important. State of Ohio, the national. If I view the school district as the only important services are the ones that affect my children or my grandchildren, or I remember and enjoyed in school, wow, and then you look out and say, what are all these services? Why am I funding all those services?
educators can also point to the contributions that an educated public makes to their community. People with more education tend to be the ones to attract business development to an area. They often make more money and pay more taxes. They're also likely to want to be part of the democratic process and get more involved in the community in general. Investing in the youth of the community is an investment in the future of our society. Wise as it is to pay for schools, throughout 200 years of growth, we've arrived at no solutions. The year 2005 finds the Ohio legislature struggling to come up with a plan acceptable to the courts, who have ruled repeatedly, starting in the 1990s, that Ohio's school funding is unconstitutional. State Representative Tom Collier explains.
School funding is a fundamentally flawed system, if you will, in every state. There are more than 48 states there are 48 states that have some sort of Supreme Court ruling that says that the way they fund public education in that state is not adequate. So Ohio is one of those states, and we've been in our DeRolf lawsuit for more than a dozen years. The problem becomes that, perfect school funding is kind of like a unicorn. People say they'll know it when they see it, they've just never seen it. And we don't know that it ever even exists.
Representative Collier describes the heart of the problem.
And the complaint at the time was that this child, DeRolf, in Perry County didn't get the same opportunity for the same education as a student, say, Mount Vernon system might have, because it's based on property tax. Property tax in that area based on value of property. The value of property in Southern Ohio was much, much lower, and still continues to be today, much lower than, say, the property values in Mount Vernon. So the complaint was that we don't have an equal system that provides an equal opportunity for an adequate education throughout Ohio. And more dollars have gone to the poorer districts to help offset the lower property values. Well, the reverse of that is that if you live in a wealthier district, all of a sudden you used to bring in great dollars from your values. Now that actually hurts you, because the state says, well, if you're not in those lower valued districts, then we're not going to give you as much, because we have to make it up. Remember the lawsuit, we have to make it up where it was said that we needed to.
And the result of this redistributed education money?
That actually Ohio has not only met but exceeded the process that was prescribed in draw for the offsetting penalty, if you will, of a student who lived in a poorer district. Because now, percentage-wise, those in poorer districts actually are at somewhat of an advantage, $80 or $85 a year advantage over those in a more wealthy district. And so what's happened is somewhat of a Robin Hood principle, where we take from the richer districts, or those that have higher values, and we've provided to those of lower values to help offset, which is at the time what people in the poorer districts thought ought to happen. Well, now we have people at the other end of the scale, and those that are wealthier districts, saying, wait, this isn't fair. You know, we're raising this money locally. People move to our communities because they want good schools. They want the extra things we can provide by those higher values. And that's one of the things that makes the values higher, is the good of education. Well, we can't have it both ways.
Former school board member Tim Carl makes this observation of some Mount Vernon concerns with school funding when he was on the board in the 1970s.
It's funny, to me, to see some of the reasons why people got excited. Now, you would think maybe reduction of curriculum might get them excited. Nope. Funding, that didn't seem to get them particularly excited. But we would have angry parents turning up concerning who's on the cheerleading team. Now, that got people very hot under the collar.
After Knox County was created in 1808, the first school was started in about 1811. What must the school have been like? Imagine studying and learning in a log cabin that would be primitive by the standards of 2005. The roof was clapboards nailed down to the logs. There were small windows for light, a large fireplace for heat, and a hand-drawn map of Mount Vernon penned by an early teacher. The room arrangement was nothing like today's classrooms.
There was no furniture but the teacher's chair and rough slab benches for pupils' seats. Desks were made of boards attached to the walls, inclining inward and a little downward, on which the pupils placed their books and slates and copybooks. Pupils all sat with faces to the walls and backs to the teacher.
Mount Vernon's first school building lasted only 6 years. From A. Banning Norton, we learn that in 1817,
the little log schoolhouse on the public square had served its time, and at private houses, school had for some time been kept, when the public-spirited men in Mount Vernon started subscriptions to build another in 1817.
the first brick schoolhouse was completed in 1818 on 2 lots on Mulberry. This was a multi-purpose 2-story structure with the Masonic Lodge occupying the 2nd floor and church services held on the 1st floor on Sundays. There wasn't enough money to complete construction right away, so the walls had no plaster for another 6 years, and the furniture was the same log and slab benches used in the log school. Henry Curtis, a young settler who would become a prominent attorney and community leader, spearheaded the project to plaster the walls in 1824. The log slab furniture was replaced as well. Now students could sit in chairs and recite properly in a central open space in the downstairs room. Well, this must have seemed luxurious considering that there were still hundreds of small log schoolhouses in the surrounding countryside as late as the 1840s. By 1845, the mayor and city council were responsible for the school. Now, even though this building was brick, it was in a sorry state. Mount Vernon's 1849 stumble towards more effective management and appropriate facilities was resolved in 1853 when the Ohio school law established a school board and the power to tax. The new buildings have been arriving regularly since the high school in 1859. This school, built on the eve of the Civil War, which threatened the Union of the United States, was called the Union Building. It stood on this site on the northwest corner of North Mulberry and West Hamtramck. Built for $30,000, it was on the cutting edge of education in Ohio, one of only about 150 high schools in the entire state. The architecture of this building provided a stark contrast with the many log cabins and one-room schools that still existed only a few miles away. A school system that 15 short years earlier was represented by only one building, and that in serious disrepair, was on its way to excellence. New school buildings kept pace with the growing population. The Fifth Ward School, Davis School, was a two-story brick building with 4 rooms located here on North Street. It served generations of school children for 65 years until 1939. Now, nothing can be seen of the old Davis School, but
the stones used to build the field house and these gates at the former athletic field came from Davis School.
The Second Ward School, also called the West School, was another two-story brick building at Jackson and Vine Streets. It was put into service in 1877 and replaced in 1915 with the structure on the site today. West School closed as an elementary school in 2005. Those students now attend Twin Oak Elementary. The Third Ward had used a building on Chestnut, built in 1850 and torn down in 1883. It was replaced for $13,000 by a building that lasted till 1938. The third structure here was Central School. Bob Christ talks about his years in the Third Ward School.
I went to the old Third Ward, which was a fire trap, and then they tore that down and built the building that's there now when I was, I don't know, maybe 3rd or 4th grade. And it was great because we went half days to high school a whole year, and I was out at noon. So, I mean, for a kid, having all afternoon off every day during the school year was tremendous.
The Fourth Ward School was brick, 2 stories and 4 rooms near the Baltimore and Ohio Depot. It was built in 1874, enlarged in 1892, and torn down after 1950. The First Ward School was on the site of today's East Elementary School. This building was erected in 1907 with some later additions. Walter Rudin remembers.
Oh, we had swings and ran around. They just let us out of the building for 10 or 15 minutes. We ran around. I went to First Ward, which was down at East School now, which is, the building's still there. They've added to it, of course. But that's where I went to grade school, because we had good teachers. We had good schools.
Thanks to additions, the high school became very large and graduated more than 1,000 high school students before it was demolished in 1923. A replacement building was finished on this site in 1924, and this building served as high school and then middle school until nearly the 21st century. On the other side of the same block, on the southwest corner of Mulberry and Burgess, a second high school was completed in 1898 and connected to the Union Building by a corridor. Functioning first as a high school and then a junior high, it was raised in 1938. Even with all of this new construction, the reality in the 1800s were that space and resources were still tight. For example, in 1880, the high school had an enrollment of 85 and only 3 rooms in which to hold the classes, an average of 28 students per room. Not bad until you consider that 4 grades and a huge range of subjects were being taught simultaneously in just 3 rooms. In the 1900s, the population of Mount Vernon expanded into the north side of the city. To meet this increase, Dan Emmett Elementary School was built in 1950, closing the Fourth Ward School. Columbia School was first built in 1924 as a K-12 building, and then replaced in 1957 as an elementary school with the building in use today. 2 county schools, Elmwood and Amity, joined the Mount Vernon schools in 1938. Pleasant Street opened as a middle school in 1959. Today's Mount Vernon High School opened in 1970, at which time the school on Mulberry Street became a middle school. Today's Mount Vernon Middle School was built in 1996. The vacant Mulberry Street building was sold to a private company but not developed. And meanwhile, the building has been the target of vandals, resulting in a fire that damaged the cupola in 2004. The newest school is Twin Oak Elementary, opened in 2004. It was the first new elementary school in Mount Vernon since 1959. Twin Oak was built after thorough study of school use, future population and student needs, and the cost of renovating existing buildings. Citizen groups representing all the major stakeholders in the new school carefully deliberated the options before the decision was made to build. While virtually all school construction is funded through the sale of bonds, Twin Oaks construction was paid by funds set aside by previous school boards, just as you and I would save for a new home. Twin Oak was named in honor of the famed twin oak tree, which was located on this land from the time when Native Americans may have grafted it together. The twin oak has symbolized unity to generations who've occupied this spot. Twin Oak students have preserved this heritage by planting a new twin oak for the 21st century. This building contains many features representing 2005's cutting-edge technology for schools.
This is a speaker amplifier for your voice, which I love. I use every day because my voice is not very loud. They hear in their own task more when I have the speaker on.
You have a TV in almost every room besides the bathroom.
The learning goals with technology, with the program that they're using, the learning goals are it's adjusted, it's self-adjusted. So as the kids are answering questions, it will adjust to their level. And it's based on their pattern of response. So if they're, for instance, have 10 questions and they missed 5, well, that doesn't sound very good. But if it was the first 5 that they missed and the second 5 they got right, then the computer knows that they're actually getting it now, and it will move to a little higher level. So it self-adjusts. If they start missing too many, it will lower. And I've seen it get better and better and better every single year. The most important thing from technology is you can get this data that you can work with.
Since the first school, more has changed than just buildings. In those early days, time was a major challenge. School was only held 3 months of the year, the winters, because children were needed at home for work during all the other seasons. According to Albert Williams, the outcome of the scheduling was that
boys would study these books for 3 months and then work at home 9 months and commence in the forepart of the same books again, as usually they had forgotten nearly all they had learned in the previous term. Unless exceptionally bright scholars, and these sometimes were allowed to begin partway through the book at the second term. Teachers changed frequently, and this made matters still worse. These old books were conned over year after year until literally worn out and the children grown up to be of a marriageable age. Many never did learn what the back part of their first school books contained.
although life on the frontier of Ohio in the early 1800s didn't allow much time for school, by the middle of the 1800s, school laws required education for all students. But high school was still considered a luxury, and many people didn't complete high school. By 1859, the 3-month school year, which had been such a problem for educational progress in the early 1800s, was set at 10 months. It was 1859 before students were separated by achievement level into grades: primary, secondary, grammar, and high school. To enter the next grade, you had to pass an exam. Now, public exams were given to everybody at the end of every term. Now, in those days, the school year was divided into 3 terms, so that students faced these public exams 3 times a year. It generally took 8 years to complete the first 4 grades, while high school took another 3 or 4 years. When Ohio's compulsory school attendance law was passed in 1877, it was not well enforced, and many people still didn't attend high school. The history of the schools in Mount Vernon has to include the story of our youngest citizens and children with disabilities. Preschool and early childhood education has been in place since at least the mid-1900s, with the Head Start program of the 1960s making great gains in ensuring that children who are economically disadvantaged would have the same educational start in life as children born in more prosperous families. Educational opportunities for people with disabilities began to be developed in Mount Vernon in the 1970s in the programs at the Mount Vernon Developmental Center and the New Hope School. By the 1990s, education for people with developmental disabilities wasn't just encouraged, it was required by the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Part of that bill was to say that children, once they turn 3 years of age, if they have a special need, or a developmental delay is another word for that, they must be served by the public schools. And so the public schools were then required to offer programming and specially trained teachers to work with those children.
One of the big changes in the early 90s was the most severely handicapped students at one time in Mount Vernon and elsewhere were served in different schools. In Knox County, it was Knox New Hope.
And we had children that were gifted, and we had children that were cognitively delayed in a very significant level.
With the mandate of mainstreaming and inclusion for handicapped students, all of those students from 3 through 22 that once attended Knox New Hope now attend Mount Vernon City Schools.
And I think that children who came in that were typical began to get an early understanding of the value of a person. It has nothing to do with what you can do, but it has everything to do with who you are and who you're being. And I know that that the programming in early childhood is very open-ended, so that children that are bright and ready to do all the work with literacy and math can do that side by side with children that are interested in literacy and math, but at a very different level.
At the other end of the age spectrum from the preschoolers of Mount Vernon are the college students. Now, while Kenyon College is not in Mount Vernon, Kenyon students and their parents come to and through Mount Vernon, making a sizable contribution to the local economy. And Kenyon students and staff make a significant cultural contribution to the entire community.
We're very grateful to Kenyon College and the Mount Vernon Nazarene College for the opportunities they bring us in terms of theater. We've always taken our children to the theater, the music programs, the lectures. We've done that ongoing. They brought authors to our children and our family that we never would have had.
Within the town of Mount Vernon is a branch of the Central Ohio Technical College and the Mount Vernon Nazarene University. Central Ohio Technical College, COTC, has offered classes for years on the campus of the Knox County Career Center. In 2006, COTC announced its intention to establish a Mount Vernon campus in downtown Mount Vernon, renovating several buildings for student use.
When you look at educational services along a continuum, what you will visually see is that in Knox County there's a gap. And that gap is in 2-year technological education. And interestingly enough, that's our niche. That's what we do. But I'm emphasizing not only do students gain real-world skills and can immediately be employed in technical fields, but in addition to that, we're empowering them with a degree that they, at a later time, might choose to go on for the baccalaureate.
I think only about 17% of the population has a college degree in Knox County. The other benefit that we have, our average student age is 27, and many of the students that come to COTC are working, people that have a job, have a family. They might be single mothers or single fathers, and this is an opportunity for them to come in, get the class, especially here in Mount Vernon. It's convenient for them. So I think that we are an important part of the economic development structure, the educational structure of this community. We have a commitment. We've committed that this is what we're going to do.
The Mount Vernon Nazarene University has become a major partner in the life and growth of Mount Vernon. The Mount Vernon Nazarene University in 1966 was 209 acres of farm and not much else. Through the vision and heroic efforts of those founding the college and Mount Vernon community leaders, students entered in 1969. The college's mission then was to create a unique educational environment that would be life-changing. The 1970s began in mud with a library which had been covered in plastic to keep out the squirrels and went on to achieve accreditation as a 4-year college. In the 1980s, the college continued to expand in size and in programs. The expansions included a radio station which serves both the college and the Mount Vernon community. The decade was capped by construction of a magnificent chapel and fine arts facility. In the 1990s, the college became a university, now offering graduate study as well as undergraduate degrees.
Well, I see a deepening of our programs, both at this location and externally. But if we look at this location, I see increased student growth, increased academic opportunities, increased extracurricular opportunities for our students, as well as perhaps a growing and vital relationship, continued relationship with the community. We're exploring different alternatives right now as far as various sites around Mount Vernon that we may extend from this campus and take our programs out into the community and partner with the community in a variety of ways. You know, there's a bright future for this university, and I think the community will be proud of both, I know it is currently of what's here, but I see a strengthening university, one that's growing and one that continues to be dynamic, one that desires greatly to be a part of the community and partner with it in various ways, whether it's in sharing facilities, whether it's in programs, whether it's in partnering with the education community here, the business community. I think there's a lot that we have to offer, and I think there's a lot that the community has to offer.
The Mount Vernon Nazarene University is a truly incredible Mount Vernon story of educational growth and achievement. School board efforts in the 20th century to make schools increasingly cost-effective was made possible by the invention of the car and the school bus. A series of consolidations on the south end of town began in 1908 and resulted in Columbia School, first built in 1924. Several additional schools consolidated into Columbia, all joining in the current building by 1957. School consolidation in 1927 assembled all 7th and 8th graders in Mount Vernon's first junior high school on North Mulberry. Consolidation proceeded with the addition of Elmwood School to the school system in 1938 and Gambier and Amity in 1960. Pleasant Street School was built as a middle school combining 6th, 7th, and 8th graders in 1959. In 1970, Pleasant Street became an elementary school, closing Amity, Hiawatha, and Central elementary schools. Consolidation continued in 2004 with the opening of Twin Oak Elementary School, which closed Elmwood and West schools. Opposition to consolidation has been based partly on which educational setting is better. When consolidation began in Mount Vernon 100 years ago, the countryside was still dotted with one-room schools. In 2005, there are people in Mount Vernon who remember attending one-room schools. While the one-room school experience had its pros and cons, resources to provide education have never been unlimited. The budget must always be a consideration. Supporters of consolidation can show that bringing lots of children to a central location is more cost-effective than maintaining many buildings. Education might be better too, with teachers who are able to address children's individual needs rather than having to be an expert in all levels of all topics. Another part of the issue of consolidation concerns identity. To what extent do people define themselves by the schools they and their children attend?
Yeah, all of us that went to East School, whenever we have reunions, we always separate from the rest of the gang and have a picture I have several pictures of the East School gang. And we were very competitive with each other, academically competitive to see who could get the highest grades and all of that. But we've maintained this connection, you know, here we are 50 years later and still think of ourselves as East School people.
After consolidation, do children lose a valuable sense of community by being in a larger school with more children? Might they feel lost in a larger school environment?
It's a lot better and you can make more friends because of more of the people are there and it's really good. It's a really good school. And there's a lot more people. I like it better with more kids because you can make more friends and get to know other people.
When you first come here, you have to take a while to get used to going around.
Yeah, you might not have as much friends as you really did, but you'd meet some more.
Some express concern at the loss of the neighborhood school.
Yeah. Well, there's been some argument that's been made that these huge schools like Columbine, that the bigger you get, the more problems you have, because you do end up with almost a whole society there of different claques and groups and things of this sort. And so I would favor the small school. That's why I am so strongly in favor of neighborhood schools that kids can walk to. You know, that place out there by the country club, that scares me to death. If one of those little grade school kids misses his bus, he may never be seen again. I mean, it is so distant from Mount Vernon, and everybody has to ride the bus. Well, East School, we almost all walked, always. So we just all hung around the school after school. And like that one out by the country club, it's a beautiful school, but it's not a neighborhood grade school, not by any stretch of the imagination.
What have been the benefits and the downsides of school consolidation in Mount Vernon, and how has it affected the students?
Well, the downside would be that we are now not a little neighborhood school where the kids are walking to their school. A lot of times they're walking to it after school hours. We're out in the country now, and everybody has to be bused into this school. I still don't feel that it's an extremely large school.
I know that when I taught at West, it was a neighborhood school, and it was nice because it was small. You knew all the kids. You knew every situation pretty much, and so you would be able to talk more one-on-one with each child because you knew them.
Now I have 2 other people teaching the 5th grade that we can have meetings and bounce ideas off each other. So that's the upside of consolidating.
I know the parents liked it because it was convenient. The kids can walk to school.
You know, I wouldn't want to consolidate and get a huge school where you don't know the children. I know all the kids in the 5th grade, and so we team teach.
But as we started exploring building at this school and then bringing them all here, obviously this is the better. Just the building in and of itself. When the kids walked in, the very first day that they were able to tour the building before we actually moved, they were just in awe of the facility. They were more respectful. They were here to learn. And it was just a totally different attitude towards learning because they had such this wonderful facility and opportunity. So as we moved here, we still found that we're still a family.
We can check out more books in the library, and we can do more things in art and stuff, and we don't have to eat and gym and music room in one room. They're all different rooms.
It's a lot larger and there's more room.
Gym and basically the way they've changed the food and stuff for lunch. They've changed the pizza.
The rooms are a lot nicer, and we don't have the hard floors. We actually have carpet and music room isn't the art room also. Because at my old school, the art room was in the music room. And you can check out more books, and the gym's bigger and the school's bigger.
Larger in size, better atmosphere, and kinder.
To make more friends.
I was going to say, do you think it's harder or easier when you have more kids?
Easier.
Why is it easier?
Because you can find more people that you have stuff in common with.
It's not everybody knows each other, and they're all okay with talking to each other and stuff.
This issue of consolidation in Mount Vernon will be continually discussed as schools evolve. What do you think? As Albert Williams tells it, in the early 1800s, a popular way for the community to have fun was in the guise of education. The spelling school, about twice a month.
A moonshiny evening was generally selected, and at a time when good sleigh riding obtained, when the neighboring schools were invited to take part in the program, especially in spelling down. Everybody came from far and near, the old folks, the young folks, the children, and every dog on the premises followed the jingle of the merry sleigh bells. The great box stove, filled up with the best fuel on earth, hickory wood, crackled and sent forth a glow appreciated by all till way along in the program, when the air in the log building became intense. The good spellers were permitted to choose sides, drawing cuts for who should be selected first. A tally sheet was carefully kept to see who missed the most words. After recess, the spelling down began in earnest, and the home stretch was always interesting. He or she who stood the longest against the jaw-breaking words found in Webster was accounted a hero or heroine indeed.
Most people of 2005 would agree that the value of our schools can't be fully measured by proficiency exam scores. To get a clear picture of the value of our schools through 200 years, we must discover the impact those schools have had on the individuals who've passed through them and on the community. Hear what some of Mount Vernon students from earlier days say.
Well, I went through First Ward and junior high up on Mulberry Street, and I got a good education. I didn't have any trouble. And in fact, I liked the math teacher so well, I had 4 years with her. I don't know whether you knew Mrs. Baker or not, but she taught math, and I was in her class all 4 years. I took everything she had. Well, it was 4 grades. It was a country school. They went 8 years to that school. The first and second grade were together, and the third and fourth, fifth and sixth, seventh and eighth. We had 4 teachers and 1 janitor, and Mr. Miser was the teacher of the 7th and 8th grades, and he did all the paddling and all the correcting.
There was paddling?
Yeah, there was paddling. He had a nice big paddle down in the church office. Sassing the teacher, or running in the hall, or throwing papers, not paying attention. Like a big butter paddle about so long with holes in it. And you knew it I was lucky I didn't have one, but the kids that got it realized that they had something.
Paddling.
If you got a paddling at school, you're going to get twice as bad at home. They believed in spare the rod and spoil the child.
While some people have had positive, even inspirational school experiences in Mount Vernon, as in all towns, some have not. Mount Vernon has been spared the deep racial tensions that have existed in some towns, but even so, being an African American child in a predominantly white school has sometimes been hard.
I never knew I was black until I went into high school, and come time to date the girls, then they really frowned on you when you found one that liked you and they didn't like her, but really I've had a wonderful childhood, and I can't say that I was put upon too bad. Once in a while you'd be called strange names, but that was kind of necessary, but you always had a pile of rocks laying by a telephone pole, so when you was going home, you had something to throw to stop the inflow of what people were trying to say and do to you. So once in a while, you was called a big N, but as they say, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words never hurt me, and we went right on and enjoyed it. And sometimes some of the white students, when you were called a kind of a vicious name, if you want to call that a vicious name, why, they go punch somebody in the mouth. They go punch their own white brother in the mouth for disrespecting you. A name, I don't know, I imagine they still do it.
Things changed for me when I started to attend school, and I think that's true of the experiences of most students and children of color. It's usually around the time that young children go off to school that they have their first experience with someone calling to their attention and the attentions of others of difference. And as you can imagine, being an African American child going to school in Mount Vernon, particularly Hiawatha School, where all of the black children in that school, except for maybe 2, were either my siblings or my cousins, we were pretty much in a class by ourselves. Literally. In those days we walked home for lunch. It's kind of neat, neighborhood school. It's a classic neighborhood school, living 2 or 3 blocks from the school, and you'd come home at lunchtime. I can very specifically recall walking home with 2 or 3 of my friends in first grade, and a couple trailing behind, and at one point one said something about nigger. This is in first grade. And I turned around, and one of them said, "Oh, we're not talking to you, I'm talking to him," the other white child, as if to say, by calling him nigger, I'm not offending you in any way. As I happened to be sitting in the stands 3 years ago, at Mount Vernon High School Stadium, at my daughter's track meet. And there were 3 kids sitting behind me, about 3 rows behind, and Mount Vernon was running track against a team that had some black runners. And all of a sudden, I heard someone sitting behind me say, "Oh no, we're not going to win this race. Look, they have a nigger running." This was 3 years ago. You can imagine the feelings, because I believe, I said, well, I guess my daughter was in 7th grade. I was thinking she was 8th grade. But in any event, I turned around and I looked at these 3 young people, and they were all from Mount Vernon. In fact, one had a track uniform on. She was the teammate of my daughter. And so I said, "What did I just hear you say?" I was compelled to say something, because when I was my daughter's age, I could not. And again, it's something about getting old, that the time comes when you can no longer let those things go. So I got up and I walked up to the press box or whatever they have up there, and the coach was there. Netter was the coach. And I said, "Coach, we've got a problem here." I said, "You have some students sitting out here who are talking about niggers." And she threw open the door and said, "You 3, in here now." Now, what's important about this story isn't that Netter was upset. What was important was that life had changed for me. I was no longer that kid sitting in the stands, unwilling to acknowledge the hurt. I have children now, and someone has to stop it.
By shaping the values and attitudes of the next generation, Mount Vernon schools have shaped the community. In developing the cohesiveness that makes a community thrive, the schools have played a central role from the beginning.
We share a common ground, we share our histories, we share our histories.
We've seen 200 years of Mount Vernon's education through the eyes of the children and the community, then and now. Important educational issues have challenged this town since 1805. Expectations about educational goals, school funding, teacher preparation, changes in curriculum to meet needs, whether, when, and where to build new schools, and school consolidation. Each of these issues has been with us for 200 years. The same issues are shared by other towns who have lived through the same historical forces. Each of our solutions, different at different times, reflect the values of our community. Our unique solutions to these challenges also inspire and limit the ways in which our communities will develop.
The quality of the education here has a lot to do with what goes on in Mount Vernon. And I remembered many times that people who were coming to Mount Vernon to sort of interview Mount Vernon, to check Mount Vernon out, people who were going to be physicians or people who were going to be management people at Cooper, now Rolls, people who were going to come and teach at Kenyon, they would, because they had such strong families and they were so concerned about their children's education, they would come to the school, and as the guidance counselor, you're sort of the point man on that, and they were very interested in discussing what was going on in schools, what programs we had, what our test scores were, and things like that. And I'd like to believe that a number of them came to Mount Vernon because of the quality, that the final decision was made based on the quality of the schools. And so I think some of the high quality families that we have in Mount Vernon came here primarily because of the schools.
big impact on the city, I think.
When people come to town, not only individuals, but also prospective businesses that want to come to town and start an industry or a business, they look at education. It's very, very common to do that. It's very important to them and for their employees to have a quality education. So I definitely think that the quality of the education in Mount Vernon schools has been attractive to business and industry, and we need to keep it that way because there needs to be a partnership between the schools and the city.
Yeah, I've talked with CEOs, and I've also talked with bankers. I have talked with realtors. All these people have contact with people moving into the community, whether it's at a blue-collar job or a white-collar job. And their first thing out of their mouth is, what's your school system like? How well is your school system supported?
The choices we make as we address these issues form a big part of our community's identity and cohesiveness, the way we see ourselves and the way the world sees us. Consider the implications for this town's future.
In the next 100 years in public education, it's going to be extremely important that we maintain some vestiges of local governance, or you're going to lose all of that cultural heritage.
I think it's the colleges, I think it's the industry here, I think it's the agricultural base, I think it's the quality of schools, I think that all that brings a great diversity and good quality people.
Kids are learning more in school than at any time in the past. You know, in 1950, what we knew was this: if we taught kids to work hard and be dedicated and have that work ethic, they were going to be successful. My daughter and son just graduated from high school a few years ago and are graduating from college. They are the first generation in this nation that without skills face a lower standard of living than their parents. We need to teach them to be lifelong learners. We need to give children the ability to learn. There is today, in 2006, there's discussion in the state of Ohio about expanding the requirements for students to graduate from high school. Now, in the last 10 years, we've expanded the requirements about 6 different times. In fact, we kid about they can't even pick their backpack up to get out of the building now. But no one is talking about the need, for example, to get away from K-12 education and go to K-14 education. See, because traditionally, we're stuck in this 13-year box, parameter, that you're supposed to be done with your public education at the age of 18 or 17, but 12 years. Well, we've reached a point where we are bursting at the seams, and what is required or should be required for students that are now graduating from public education. Maybe it's going to take more time.
Think about this for just a second. You know, basically speaking, schools are only open from 8 to 2, 8 to 3. They're closed the rest of the time. So if you're going to taxpayers and you're saying, you know, we need some money and we need to do this and we need to do that, but you're running a facility that's only open a third of the time.
You can go to year-round school. The reason we don't have, I would contend, the reason we do not have year-round school in our nation to any great degree, we are on the agricultural calendar from a time when we were an agricultural nation and children needed to be home and to be able to work on the farm so the family could subsist. And so to simply say, go to year-round school, well, you're going to have to air condition every building in the Midwest to do that because they're not designed, you know, I mean, to have that because they're designed around the old calendar. The other reason is if you go to year-round schools, you're talking more days of school. And you're talking, there's a cost involved in that, and now who is going to pay that cost?
And it all goes back to what can you do as a whole, not just as an institution in and of itself by itself, but surviving in a community that money is put into by community members, leaders in the community who have been in the community for some period of time, understand the community, understand its needs. You could dovetail all kinds of things into that.
And I remember several years ago we had a gentleman in here and he said, well, he said, I'm a missionary. That's why my son was homeschooled. And he said, I've been all over the country setting up schools. He said, I've set up 21 schools, but he said, I've never found a spirit that exists like exists in this school. and it made me want to cry, because that is what it's all about, is that kind of creating that kind of climate. And I mean, you have to encourage the academics, and you encourage the teachers, and you celebrate what's right, and you know, basically that's what it's about.
Our task in the next 50 years as educators is to become the resource that allows you to understand the knowledge. First off, get the good knowledge. Get the good knowledge, because the knowledge is available doesn't mean it's all accurate and correct. Our worth in the future is going to be able to help you learn it, be able to help you understand it, and then be able to apply it.
And it all boils down to not only communication, but people. People have to be able to see, understand the communities they're in, how they function in the community, and what they can do to draw in what I think we've all said, just maybe in different ways. How can you make opportunities better for the young, for your children, which is paramount.
The choices we've made about education, the knowledge, the skills, and the values we've given our youngsters have brought Mount Vernon from the 1805 frontier to the present. The choices we make today will propel us into the next 200 years and beyond. Here we see our future. Our children's children ask that we choose wisely. Hey, how you guys doing? Hear about Mount Vernon's first schoolhouse, 1811 through 1818.
The only ornament that relieved the unbroken and monotonous view of rough log walls was a map of the town of Mount Vernon drawn by the teacher. On this map was delineated the buildings that had been erected in town, and most prominent among which was this humble educational edifice. In the southwestern part of the town plat was graphically portrayed the tall wild grass, the thick undergrowth of the native forest, with a few large trees. And upon a branch of one of these perched a lonely owl, in all his silent, solemn wisdom, overlooking, like a guardian angel, the rise and progress of the town of Mount Vernon and the beautiful stream bearing his name, which skirts the southern boundary of the town, now called the Cocosing River.
In 1818, the second school was built, a brick building which stood on the spot occupied by Flapper's Bar and Grill in 2007. Now, this school remained in use until the 1850s. By 1845, even though this building was brick rather than the still common log cabin school, it was in a sorry state. According to school board president Joseph Davis, who told the story in 1878,
at this time, in 1845, the only public schoolhouse in the town was the old two-story brick on Mulberry Street in the 5th Ward, and by neglect it had become so dilapidated as to be unfit to be occupied for school purposes without thorough repairing.
In the post-Civil War era of the 1870s and 80s, the town of Mount Vernon prospered. Industry continued to develop, and the gas and glass boom was beginning. When Joseph Davis was school board president in 1878, he published a little volume of History, Rules, and Course of Study of the Mount Vernon Public Schools, 1878. He paints an insider's picture of what it might have been like to be a student or teacher in the schools of those days. Rules for everyone are clearly spelled out. From his general rules, we learn,
the school year shall consist of 40 weeks, divided into 3 terms. The school hours shall be from 8:55 a.m. to 12 noon, and from 1:30 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. There shall be a public examination of the pupils of all the schools at the close of each term, and the annual examination at the close of the 3rd term shall be for promotion. The recess is for the purpose of thoroughly ventilating the rooms, as well as to furnish air and exercise for the pupils. Teachers are required to open the windows and doors and to keep a careful supervision of the pupils on the playgrounds. No pupil will be allowed to remain in the rooms during the recess, except the girls in the high school.
He was clear about duties of pupils. He lists a number of rules you would expect, plus these which might seem a little strict to 21st century ears.
Pupils must not collect about the school buildings before the ringing of the first bell. They shall walk quietly and in single file up and down the stairs and through the halls, making no unnecessary noise, nor engaging in any conversation. They shall not remain in the halls, stairways, or on the walks. They shall leave the school premises and go directly home after the close of school. They shall not bring to school books, papers, or anything not required by their studies. Pupils are forbidden to throw stones, snowballs, or missiles of any kinds near the school buildings.
School funding was an issue for these first schools, just as it is 200 years later. In 1805, there was no universal public education and no law providing money for schools. Many children were taught at home by their mothers. The first schools in Mount Vernon were subscription enterprises, pay to play at its most basic. According to Martin Welker, a retired judge, writing his recollections of the subscription schools of Knox County of 1832,
subscription schools consisted of an agreement by the patrons of the school to pay the teachers so much per scholar for so many months teaching, generally in the winter season, and conditioned that the master should be boarded during the time. As a general thing, he was boarded in the several families of the scholars, the time being equally divided among them. The master, in this way, became well acquainted with his patrons and pupils, and made it very desirable on the part of scholars to have him in the family.
In 1825, the state legislature instituted a half-mill property tax earmarked for schools, the proceeds of which have gone unmentioned in any local history. Did any of this money ever reach Mount Vernon schools? 1829 saw a 3/4 mill property tax for schools leveled locally, and township trustees administered the schools until Mount Vernon was incorporated in 1845. But the subscription system of school funding remained firmly entrenched in rural areas like Mount Vernon until the 1850s. Free education did not arrive in Mount Vernon until that time. In 1849 and in 1853, the Ohio school law put a more uniform structure to funding the state schools. According to the Ohio Historical Society,
property taxes would pay for the school system. A school board, elected by the community, would make decisions about the system's management and hire the necessary professionals to run each school. As a result of this law, the state collected a uniform property tax across the state, which it then redistributed to each school district based upon the number of students enrolled. The school law of 1853 also provided money for school libraries for the first time in Ohio's history.
conditions in the schools of the first half of the 1800s may sound primitive 200 years later, but from such schools came John Sherman and Dan Emmett. Schools that seemed rudimentary by 21st century standards nurtured a love for learning that took root and produced astonishing results as the young nation grew. The experiences of Mount Vernon students, The mix of inspiring education with some not so happy times, typical in every town, have shaped all of these people who contribute or have contributed in significant ways to the Mount Vernon community. Hear these voices of Mount Vernon students from the recent past.
Well, we played the other team, but you just went in your school clothes. We had no helmets, no shoes or anything. You just your school clothes, and we played the Columbus Road team, which we hated with a passion. They hated us too, but it was a pretty good tussle when we had a football game. But,
How old were you kids then?
well, 7, 8, 9. But,
You and
well, it was 4 grades. It was a country school. They went 8 years to that school. The first and second grade were together, and the third and fourth, fifth and sixth, seventh and eighth. We had 4 teachers and 1 janitor, and Mr. Miser was the teacher of the 7th and 8th grades, and he did all the paddling and all the correcting.
there was paddling?
Yeah, there was paddling. He had a nice big paddle down in the church office. And
What kind of things did kids do to get paddled
sassing the teacher, or running in the hall, or
over at that school?
we had everything. We had spelling, geography, and geometry, and history, and science, and physical education. Had music once a week. And when I was in the first few grades, we had a prayer time each week. Okay. And of course that is out now.
Did you, what did you do for lunch?
You took your lunch. We carried our lunch.
The schedule?
You had a 15-minute recess in the morning and a 15-minute recess in the afternoon.
What did you get to do for recesses?
Go out in the yard and play ball or run around and teeter-totters, and they had swings. And they just mess around for But when we come back in, and we all had to line up in the basement with the grades you're in, then you marched up the stairs to your rooms. And everyone in order and everyone in their own place. And
What kind of qualifications did the teachers have, do you know?
they didn't have to have too much. My first grade teacher had 6 months training in a college somewhere, and she was, well, just like a doctor, she was serving her time teaching then, and eventually she would get her teaching certificate. And Thelma Williams, she was just out of college, was probably maybe 18 years old, maybe 19. And she ended up being my 2 daughters' teacher, and she and her husband owned the Williams Flower Shop here in Mount Vernon. And she just passed away maybe 5 years ago. We never had any snow days. There was a gentleman, Mr. Lauderbaugh, had a pair of horses. Of course, he was a farmer and hauled gravel for the county to put on the roads in an old wagon. And if we had snow, he had a snow plow. He just stood on it, and one horse pulled it, and he made a path for all the kids to go to school. And I never remember not having school because of snow, because he'd make the path. The snow might be 2 foot deep or so, but you went to school. No, wasn't any bus came and picked you up. You just got yourself together and went to school.
Do you remember any teachers that you particularly admired?
I did my first grade teacher, because she evidently took a liking to me. And we had a school band. We had triangles and blocks that you rubbed together. And anyhow, she made me the leader of the band, made me a paper hat out of just a brown paper sack. And 1, 2, 3, 4, I was the leader of the band. I thought, boy, I was top dog. Well, they had a nice library at the school, and my dad was a teacher, so we had a lot of books at home. And he went to school one summer, 3 months, and became a teacher. And he said, I taught kids a lot older than I was and a lot younger, and in a one-room schoolhouse. And he taught with the old McGuffey readers, if you've ever heard of them, and that's what they taught reading with. I have a set of them here, McGuffey readers, and that's what he taught with.
You want to hear a horrible story?
Yeah.
This is something that traumatized the entire kindergarten at East School. There was in incinerator in the playground. It was three concrete block walls. And for some reason, a bunch of us, and I think I might have been one, there were about half a dozen of us, decided to be throwing rocks into this incinerator. And one of the members, a somewhat larger boy than most of the other boys, named Peter Parsons, took up a rather large rock and threw it over the wall of the incinerator and hit a kid named Larry Krebs right in the head. By the way, if you ever see this movie of Mount Vernon that was made in 1945, Larry Krebs is in that movie wearing what looks like an aviator's cap. And this is because it, I guess, crushed part of his skull, and he had to have all kinds of stitches done and things, and he missed some school because of this. So it was a very bad thing. Well, it scared the teachers to death, and the teachers decided that terrible discipline must be visited upon all the males in the kindergarten. So they took us into the building, all the little girls and little boys, and the little girls sat out in the main room, and the boys were lined up outside the cloakroom, and one at a time we were taken in that cloakroom and beaten, you know. And it was horrible because the girls are out there screaming and crying because they can hear the boys screaming and crying, and the whole thing, and we're kindergartners, 5 years old. Well, from then on, you know, I sort of, course, there were always these rumors in school that there was an electric paddling machine, and that if you didn't behave, that you'd be strapped into it. So, for instance, Mr. Geiger, who was the superintendent, who was probably the sweetest, most benign man in the world, whenever he turned up at school, we were all scared to death because we figured this is the man in charge of the electric paddling machine. But for years after this experience, every night I prayed to God that I wouldn't be paddled at school that day. I mean, it really, and I never was again, but this was very traumatic. And I've since wondered, what were they thinking of to be beating these little 5-year-olds? And I think it traumatized the little girls as much as the little boys because they were there. So that's the beginning of my education at school. After that, well, we had a bunch of wonderful teachers. I remember them all. Miss Jameson, who only very recently passed away, she was my second grade teacher. She's in that movie too, that I turn up in the second grade.
She was at the Gay Street Church?
Could be.
I think I may have known.
And we had Miss Everly, who is still walking around Mount Vernon. She was our music teacher. And I just saw her the other day, and she mentioned a girl that I was in love with in the second grade, Hester London, that she'd been in communication with Hester London. So she's got a mind just as sharp as a whip, because I told her what year I was in her class, and she said, "Oh, were you a classmate of Hester London's?" And so, I don't know. But our fourth grade teacher, she committed suicide. But the one that broke our hearts was Miss Warner. She was the sixth grade teacher, and she was beautiful, and all the little boys were in love with her, and just, she had a beautiful smile and everything. Well then, in 1948, I think I was either in the fifth or sixth grade, she announced that she was married, and she was turning from Miss Warner to Mrs. Peeler. Well, it broke our hearts, all of us, and we couldn't understand how could she betray us this way. Well then, her husband turned up to pick her up at school, and he had a new 48 Ford. And all of a sudden, all the boys understood her getting married perfectly. We would have married her ourselves for a 48 Ford, because that was the first of these really new cars, you know, new design. Always before, cars looked like turtles, 48 Ford, and we was like, it's okay, Miss, you can be Mrs. Peeler for the car, you know, we can understand that. We didn't feel nearly as betrayed. I remember the firing of General MacArthur. The entire school was required to sit by the radio and listen to his farewell speech about, you know, old soldiers never die, they just fade away. There wasn't a dry eye in the high school building. Of course, you see, the high school building was 7 through 12. That's the building up on Mulberry Street. And so I went there 3 years. And I'm trying to think what we were thinking about. And I think it was mostly Cold War stuff. Because we dropped 2 nuclear weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and from then on there was a possibility that somebody might drop them on us. So there was a lot of this civil defense and duck and cover and things. They were used to get under your desk and kiss yourself goodbye, is what I always sort of thought. But I remember one father who came, this was back when we met in the old Fourth Ward building, who complained that his daughter was becoming too smart, smarter than him, and that he really didn't want this to continue, and could we sort of pull back a bit here, because, and this was sort of an old farmer type. So that, I mean, things like that stick in your head.
Well, yeah, I got into it one time with a bad teacher. I was about in the 7th grade, and had little girl was devilish. She looked like a little angel, but she said, "Now drop your ruler at 2:30." She sent a note around, and so me, I was always doing something dumb, so I dropped mine 5 minutes later, and she became incensed, and my seat was right in front of her desk. So she was so upset, she grabbed a dictionary about, oh, you know, one big dictionary, and hit me on the head with it and drove me right down in the seat. And I got up and I cursed her out and threw my speller and hit her in the head and knocked her down on the board where it was. And then, so the teachers whipped me, wore out some paddles, and then she called her husband. He was superintendent of schools, so he came, and then he finished up the spanking I got. So I wound up down in the basement, and I knew the schoolhouse well, so I got down there, and he started coming toward me again, and I started throwing coal at him. And so they was going to put me in Lancaster, which was a boys' school at that time, so I told my mom about it when I got home. She got all steamed and went up there and went before the Parent Teachers Association and said you could injure him for life, and so they wouldn't let her teach anymore. Now that's a terrible thing. From one little incident, it telescopes into something big. Now that was the toughest time I ever had with a teacher when it was my fault.
What was the most important life lesson that you learned while you were in school?
My lesson was pay attention and show the teacher respect, which I did, and you do things for them and they do things for you. And I enjoyed going to school, and I enjoyed learning. I was stupid, but I enjoyed it anyhow. So I enjoyed school, and I enjoyed the environment, and enjoyed the kids that play out on the playground. I think that was one of the best part I liked going to school was at the playground time, recess. I was good at that.
What'd you do at recess?
Play basketball, play touch football, play baseball, play tag, play, had dashes, had track, you know, and just about anything children do on the playground. It's about the same thing. And I do remember in the wintertime they had a long cement downhill thing, and they'd wait till it freeze over, and then you could come out the back door and start running, get on this thing, and go clear down to Sugar Street on that thing. That was the fun in the wintertime. We always waited for that to happen because the janitor he liked kids, and so he'd pour water on that sidewalk so it would be frozen. There's lots of things that we'd done around there we really enjoyed. Just through anybody's time in school, there's those little things that you really enjoyed.
Yeah, well, extracurriculars I really enjoyed when I was in high school. There were many things that were offered during the school day and some after. I was part of, at that time, they called it the Jacket Journal, the school newspaper, and I was the managing editor for that. I was the editor of the yearbook, the forum in high school. Participated in student government. I was a class president my senior year. And so a number of activities that I was involved in middle school with the choir and other activities. There certainly was a great incentive to participate and to develop leadership and to develop skills that you wouldn't in a traditional classroom setting. And the extracurriculars became very important to me.
Now you're describing these as great incentives, but where's that incentive coming from? when you were in school?
Sure. I think the incentive certainly was promoted within our family, and having examples of my older brothers and sisters, and also of my mother encouraging us, and my father as well, encouraging us to participate in whether it was sporting activities or government activities or other activities that would keep us involved, help us to get to know the other students better, develop again all those skills and interpersonal skills and communication skills and things that you, although you develop them in a typical classroom, not to the extent that you would through extracurriculars. So we found them very important. I have a funny story I have to share though.
Okay.
That somewhat along education. I told you my mother was a teacher.
Yeah.
And she taught for many of the years that I was in school at East Knox. It started as Howard and then became East Knox.
Okay.
She then retired from Mount Vernon in the last few years. But in the mid-70s, I was at the middle school on Mulberry Street, I think 6th grade, and I broke my wrist on the playground after lunch. And so it was tradition, you went to the office and they said, yeah, it looks a little bad, we probably ought to get an x-ray. I'll call your mother. So they looked in the file and they called Mom at school. And of course it took time because she had to find somebody to cover her class and then come to Mount Vernon and pick up. And the funny part of the story, my mother doesn't remember this now, but what actually happened, I waited for 2.5 or 3 hours in the office of the middle school. And when she finally got there, I said, gosh, Mom, what took so long? Because it hurt, it was a broken wrist. She took me to the old Mercy Hospital, the emergency room. She says, well, I had to find somebody to cover my class. And by the time I did that and got in the car and started to head to town, she says, I couldn't remember which child they called about that broke his wrist. And so she thought, process of elimination, she went to the high school first because she had 3 students there and realized it was none of them. So then she decided it had to have been me, so she went to Pleasant Street Elementary School, forgetting that year I started at the middle school in the 6th grade, and so it took quite a while for her to get from where she was to pick me up. So I've never forgotten that. It's quite humorous, but
That's what happens with the last child.
Last of 9.
My students, well, a majority of them are being raised in the Roman Catholic Church. So, and since the St. Vincent School is a Roman Catholic school, it is the goal of the school to prepare children to live a productive life in God's company. Now that means that a certain amount of our religious education is in instruction in the Catholic faith. However, our course description, our religion coursework that the students do has some catechism in it, but a lot of it is comparative religion, especially when we get into the upper grades. They're not just learning about Christianity and not just about Roman Catholicism. They also understand what Judaism is, what Hinduism is, what Islam is about, and that we tie into our social studies curriculum, because when we study social studies in the 6th grade curriculum, we're learning about ancient civilizations. We come up through the Roman era to the end of the Roman era and then into the birth of Islam, up through the Islamic Golden Age, which takes us through the 12th, 13th century. And so that becomes a historical thing as well as a comparative religion thing. So it becomes, it's a big part of what we do. Every classroom starts and ends its day with a prayer. That makes us different from a public school. We all gather every Friday morning to have Mass together, the entire school. And each week a different class plans the Mass. So we have kindergartners standing up and reading the responsorial psalm. Most of them can master about 1 line. So there'll be a line of 8 kindergartners up there to do a 3-verse psalm. Each of them stands up and does it, but it's remarkable when you see them do that. Mm-hmm. And then older kids are singing the gospel acclamation. They become our cantors. Every week I have to train a new cantor. So it's very interesting.
I had, before this, however, left Oklahoma, and after teaching 1 year in a 1-room schoolhouse in Oklahoma, I went to teach in Louisville, Kentucky, and I taught 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade in an inner city private parochial school. And then after 1 year, I didn't like Louisville at all. I went to Atlanta to teach in a suburb school, and that was a parochial school, and I taught there 2 years and married my husband, and then taught 1 year in a public school in a little town, a little school district called Glen Haven outside of Atlanta. And that was a tremendous experience. We had a beautiful, very progressive school, and down the road was a most dreadful, horrible building where the colored children were taught. And I never have ceased to feel the experience of what was happening to those colored children. I experienced segregation a lot of ways when I was living in Atlanta. And some of my impressions of Mount Vernon are based in comparison of that experience there. In one of my favorite remembrances of Mount Vernon, my comparison when I came here, was that I did not see any of that. I came here in 45. In 46, I taught kindergarten in West School for 1 year, and I had some colored children in the program. And that was the first time I'd had experience, and all this experience I'd had of teaching, of having colored children. I saw no evidence of prejudice by the school people, by the people in the community, or by the children in the school. And I felt that that was typical of Mount Vernon. The colored population here were middle class. Some of them were highly respected. Of course, we had 1 or 2 families, but we had lots more families of white people that were problems to the community. But the colored population here were real contributors.
I was one of the teachers when they had Bible in the public schools of Mount Vernon.
Okay.
And went around to all the different schools and to the Frederickstown School too. There was a group of churches that got together and hired a teacher who was permitted to have a certain time, limited time, with each class.
Okay.
And the children had to have a waiver from the parents to be dismissed from public school to Bible lesson.
Oh.
And almost all, I think all of the classes participated, but children whose parents didn't want their child to be in it, those children were given something else to do at that time.
Well, with the American with Disabilities Act, we all think of that as being something that said you have to have sidewalks that are accessible and bathrooms and so forth. But part of that bill was to say that children, once they turn 3 years of age, if they have a special need, or a developmental delay is another word for that, they must be served by the public schools. And so the public schools were then required to offer programming and specially trained teachers to work with those children. And in addition to that, they had the component of understanding more about communication at all levels too. And I know I've had parents come back to me and say, my typical child learned so much in that classroom about how to greet a person in a wheelchair, about how to get on an elevator and communicate with someone with Down syndrome, and to respect that person and to not think that there's something about them that makes you uncomfortable. They were very comfortable. And that's a gift. It's a lifelong gift, and they benefited by that. And in addition, the parents got to know each other. One of the things that happens with special needs children is that they often feel isolated, and the families feel isolated. In this program, every parent that participated was welcoming to the other and saw the potential for their own growth and development in that process, and it was very exciting.
The voices of Mount Vernon education through 200 years speak a variety of experiences and viewpoints. The common thread to all of these voices is the importance of education in the life of the community, importance to individuals in shaping their life choices and possibilities, importance to the community by giving men and women who grew up here and those who moved here the skills and environment they needed to make Mount Vernon the thriving, cohesive community it is in 2007. With this foundation and the community's continuing commitment to education, Mount Vernon is positioned to produce generations of children and adults who will make a positive mark on Mount Vernon and the world.